If you're anything like me, you might be struggling to keep abreast of just how many new Chinese car brands are launching in Australia. And for goodness sakes, it's my job. But Geely might have a little bit of an edge on some of the other Chinese newcomers because, like Volkswagen in the Volkswagen Group, it's involved with a whole load of other brand names that are household names themselves. Volvo, Polestar, Lotus, Zeekr, Lynk & Co, and that's just to name the English-speaking brands. And with the Tesla Model Y and Kia EV5 rivaling EX5, Geely is hoping to break into the Australian market with a bang. We're here for the first Australian sample of this early production EX5, so let's see what it's about.
There's one small snag which is quite significant, and that's we don't know the exact price yet, only that the two-strong Geely EX5 range will be priced between $49,000 to $55,000. We're in the Inspire, which is the upspec version, and it has spec highlights such as 19-inch alloys, a sunroof, 16-speaker sound system, ottoman for the front passenger seat, heating and ventilation for both front seats, 256 colour ambient lighting, and plenty more, which you can read all about at the carsguide.com.au website. Perhaps it's a lack of familiarity with the brand, but from the outside at least, the Geely EX5 is inoffensive and generic. The badge design is forgettable, and the rear Geely EX5 insignia looks decidedly like an afterthought. Inside, things step up with some jazzy styling and big screens. There's no blatant copying of mainstream brands either inside, and there are the choice of two interior colours for the upspec model, Midnight that you see here, and a cream colour known as Cloud.
And inside, you're treated to some excellence that runs more than skin deep. The architecture is pretty attractive in a sort of generic but not ugly kind of way, and crucially, unlike some other Chinese cars in this price bracket, the build quality seems to be really high. The center console here feels really nice and firm, well put together. The door cards too seem to hold up to any sort of wrenching and moving around, and we didn't detect any rattles in our first 150k test, which is really impressive. Also, the materials are sort of not necessarily premium, but they're certainly on par with or slightly better than your average combustion-powered SUV at this price. You've got soft touch up here on the doors, soft on the dashboard, and this armrest is actually nice and yielding to your elbows. Same with the door. So Geely's got a lot of the basics right, including storage as well. Cabin storage is pretty cool. You've got this flying center console with lots of space down here for handbags, cameras and that sort of thing, accessible USB-A and USB-C points, as well as a 12-volt charger. There are two cup holders under this flip-up cover, but they're not great for big bottles, good for coffee cups or something like that, and the door bins will pretty easily take a 600ml bottle, and then you've got a bit more storage under the armrest. So yeah, on the whole, there's a lot right about the EX5, but not quite everything. When we come to the technology, there are some issues that I'm sure can be ironed out with some software tweaks, but I'm not sure how quickly. First of all, we've got to say there's no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto at launch of the EX5. That's getting added throughout the year, Apple CarPlay being in July. But the screen itself is very responsive. The processor seems to be pretty strong, and you've got a lot of downloadable apps, including native Spotify for music streaming. You can also use Bluetooth. It's connected to a 16-speaker sound system in here, which is possibly not as good as what you'd find in its Volvo and Polestar relations, but compared to its price point competitors, it's pretty powerful. But yeah, the things I take issue with in the screens are just the sheer number of sub-menus for vehicle controls, driver setup, lighting, all that sort of thing. It's just a few too many levels to get to what you want. And the 10.2-inch driver display in front of me, I find the text to be just a little bit small. Those are all things I reckon that could be improved upon with a bit of software update. And yeah, the bones are good, which bodes well for the EX5. There is one strange thing about this EX5, and that is that although very nicely knurled and actually made of metal, the window switches are the wrong way round. That is, unless you happen, like me, to own a 1983 Alfa Sud, which seems to also have the wrong way round window switches, in which case you feel right at home. The goodness continues back here with a similar level of material quality to the front seat, including soft touch up here on the doors and a nice yielding armrest, plus a fold down one for the center with two more cup holders, and you got some pretty decent door bins. Got aircon vents back here as well, which is pretty much to be taken for granted, but always nice to have. A couple more USB charging vents, and it feels really well set up for a family of 4 or even 5 back here. It's nice and broad, and the middle seat is genuinely usable for an adult. The backrest is pretty inclined. It does have a second position as well, but I find that to be a little bit too far back. And you don't need any extra space because at 188 centimeters tall, I've got space behind my driving position, I've got decent toe room, and I've got plenty of headroom even under the panoramic sunroof. The only slight miss back here is that the doors don't open quite to 90 degrees as you'd see in something like a Nissan X-Trail or say a Mazda CX-5, but once you're in here, child seats can be mounted with ISOFIX tabs on both outboard seats and top tethers across all three. With the Inspire, you get a power tailgate and the same boot as you get in the regular Complete, which is pretty decent. The load lip is relatively high, but it is a nice flat load bay. You've got shopping bag hooks, one on each side, an LED light, and a nice little storage cubby. One thing I noticed we're lacking is any kind of tonneau cover or cargo cover, which isn't good if you store valuables in your boot, but I guess the party piece is the fact that you've got this capacious space beneath the floor that I reckon maybe could have been engineered to take a spare tyre, but hasn't been. And the total literage is about 300 litres on top, plus 110 litres below the boot. And of course, you've got 40/60 split folding rear backrest as well. Now, it is an electric car, but the Geely EX5 has a fairly conventional layout with its electric motor mounted under the bonnet and no front boot or frunk, if you like. Its outputs are 160 kilowatts and 320 newton meters, and Geely claims that its motor is most efficient in class, certainly in terms of packaging, where it is smaller than a lot of rivals, at least on paper. We haven't compared them directly, and also more energy dense because of that, and lighter as well. Ultimately, the power delivery is pretty good. It feels about right for a car of this size, nothing crazy. There's no dual motor performance version, which I think is a good thing. And Geely has clearly tuned the throttle tip in for comfort and restraint. When you flatten the throttle, there you go. There's sort of a tenth of a second, a quarter of a second delay between what you put in and what you get out, which could be considered annoying, but I think it's probably a good idea given this car is going to be driven mostly around town, and it helps eliminate some of that jerkiness. Regenerative braking is adjustable via the screen menu as well. You can have off, or rather automatic, low, medium and high. Found medium to be a nice level, and you never get full regenerative one pedal braking even on high, but the blended brake pedal works nicely. It's quite natural, little soft, little light to press, but it doesn't give you that awful feeling where you're crossing over between regenerative and physical braking. So that's nice.
The Geely EX5 is impressively efficient, able to get 410 kilometers of WLTP-rated driving range from its in-house Aegis 60.22 kilowatt-hour lithium iron phosphate battery in up-spec Inspire guides. Over a mixed 100 kilometers of driving, we actually observed better than rated consumption of 13.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which means you'll get about 450 k's of real-world range. Charge speed isn't great though. Capped to 100 kilowatts DC, it'll take 28 minutes to go from 20 to 80%, which is some way off an XPeng G6 and a Tesla Model Y. Home charging at 11 kilowatts will take about 5.5 hours.
Now, packaging and technology, you can get it right, but where something can all fall down, a new car like this from a new brand, is in the driving experience. And initially, the EX5 is pretty promising. The ride is definitely soft, which I think on balance is better than being overly firm like a Tesla Model Y. The setup's pretty sophisticated. You've got struts up front with a multi-link rear end, you've got basic passive dampers, 3 drive modes that just adjust the steering weight and the throttle calibration. And look, most of the time the ride is what you would consider decent. There's definitely a lack of rebound control in the rear end, and I think there's just this sort of general marshmallowy wobbliness that leads to a bit of head toss that I think could make rear seat passengers feel a little bit car sick over time, but generally it's good. Sound insulation is pretty excellent, combination of the glass, interior insulation, and the choice of pretty high quality tyres, being Goodyear efficient grips, keeping things quiet in here. You could definitely have a kid fall asleep to the nice white noise going on. There are some other surprise touches as well. As you start to get into some bumpier roads and some longer drives, you notice just how comfortable the seats are. They've got heating and ventilation. which is great, and also a massage function, which is pretty strong and powerful. Quite better than most massage functions, right up there with an Audi, really, in terms of power, which is great. But where the EX5 does fall down a bit is when it comes to cornering. The steering is electric and there's no feel, of course. Relatively direct, but going around corners at reasonable speeds, you still get quite a lot of body lean. Mid-corner bumps tend to really upset this car. And if you need to do something like an emergency swerve and avoid, the suspension and the chassis just doesn't have the chops like you'd expect to find in something like a Kia EV5 or a Tesla Model Y. But if you're looking for a comfortable, quiet, and soft riding electric car, you may find this absolutely fine. It's certainly not a driver's EV, and that might just be the ticket for Geely. Safety aids, Geely has ticked all the boxes. We've got 16 active driver safety aids. No ANCAP rating yet on this car, but I'm guessing we're betting on a 5-star achievement when it all comes out. But as with all things, it's not how many safety systems you have, it's how they're implemented and how easy they are to turn on and off when you want them to be. The lane keep assist is a constant bugbear in new cars. Initially, the Geely EX5 seemed quite promising, but the more we've driven it, the more we found it to be inconsistent. Sometimes it doesn't pull you back into the lane when you would want it to, and other times it makes the steering feel all heavy and treacly on the straight ahead, and even it's just not the greatest system out there still. Some fine-tuning, some fairly heavy-duty fine-tuning, as seems to be the case with all of these Chinese cars, needs to be done to make it acceptable and a helpful system in the real world. But the other systems seem to be pretty good. More traditional systems like electronic stability control and traction control are tuned in a very conservative way, which I think is good. And the driver attention monitoring isn't overly intrusive. It doesn't get upset by wearing sunglasses, for example. You can drive it pretty normally, and when it does intervene, there are times when it probably should do. The only issue I take with it and the broader multimedia system is there are quite a few typos in the system. Distractive drive safely is the one, distractive being spelled T-I-V-E, not T-E-D, bit weird. And there's a few others in here, standards mode as opposed to standard mode, all little things that we'd like to see ironed out. So there are some kinks to iron out with the EX5, but the important things are that it's comfortable, spacious inside, and pretty full on the tech front. The big question is price. We know it's going to be between $49,000 to $55,000 for the two variants, but where it ends up is likely to dictate this car's success against an ever-growing field of rivals. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Make sure you hit subscribe to the CarsGuide YouTube channel if you haven't done so already, and head over to the website carsguide.com.au for the full detailed review.